Hi, and welcome to Faith, Art, and Tiny Houses. I'm your host, Carmen Shank. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast today. I want to talk about simplicity from a very personal perspective. I used to think of simplicity as having everything in place, having everything neatly organized, having my drawers organized, having the kitchen with everything in its spot. That's what simplicity meant to me. That's not what I think of simplicity as now. I think of it completely differently now. There are people through history who have looked at simplicity as a spiritual discipline, and they have lived lives of intentional simplicity. And I think they would say, if I'm going to speak for somebody who I don't know, I believe they would say that they were doing it for a higher purpose, and that it gave them something that was worth everything that they sacrificed along the way. Monks and nuns live in convents, abbeys, that kind of thing, and their personal ownership is very small. They may own the uniform and maybe a spare for when the one is in the laundry. And they live in a building, in a dormitory or in a cell or in a room that doesn't belong to them, but that they may keep a few personal items there. And it's really interesting, I think, to look at that, and they live in a sense of community where, somebody is doing the cooking, somebody is doing this. They're all taking their parts of the jobs that need to happen to keep a place like that running. And so there is a sense of community, and then they're coming together for prayer and for worship and community events and that kind of thing. And I think that's really an intriguing life. I'm not necessarily suggesting that it's ideal. I'm just thinking of it as it's kind of a life on one end of a continuum. People living very simply with very few personal belongings in community where everything is shared, including the work, the resources, it's all shared. Now, I don't want to get off on a tangent about the wealth of the Catholic Church or something like that. That's really not, there are other aspects of it that may not be ideal. But there is really something quite interesting about that life. So it's not like we as a culture don't understand some level of what simplicity can look like. I think we do. We tend to think it's weird, and the outfit is strange. The nun's habit thing. But simplicity doesn't have to have you don't have to dress funny to live in a place of simplicity. Oh my goodness, this example has really gotten out of hand. In my previous life, so to speak, I looked at simplicity as having everything in its place, having my stuff very well organized, having a number of colors available, because color is my thing, all of that, just having everything in its place, having a sense of order about my home. That's what I thought simplicity was. And that's something I've wanted all my life, to have my personal space be ordered, because I'm so ADD that my mind can sometimes be a place of absolute chaos. And so I really, really relish having my space be very organized and neat and all of that, because there is so much chaos between my ears. And so I welcome simplicity. I just didn't know what it was. In the fall of 2014, Xavier had been in the hospital a number of times. We had taken him to ER for chest pains. I was experiencing some health issues from living so long at a high level of stress as a restaurateur, because it's a very stressful job, and so many people were depending on me. That was wearing out my adrenal glands, and I was just experiencing really weird physical symptoms because of that. And so adrenal fatigue is a weird, it's just a weird thing. It's just, the body is tired and worn out from being stressed. And I knew there were other ways to live. And so in time, we put the restaurant on the market, we sold it, and we began to downsize dramatically. I think just because of the fact that we owned a restaurant and all the restaurant equipment and the whole 9 yards, we sold the real estate, we sold the business, and then we sold off a bunch of the stuff. And so I think overnight, or over a period of time, we probably reduced what we owned by a half. But we still had a lot of stuff. And it took us some time to get rid of a lot more stuff. I don't know if in time we eventually got rid of about half. But at the end of my first marriage, I had done this tremendous downsizing thing. I was determined to become a van dweller. And so I had downsized a bunch of stuff. I was selling furniture, and I bought a van, and I was building out the inside to become a van dweller. And I remember getting to this point where I thought, maybe I can make it with a storage unit and van. And maybe I can let go of my apartment. And I was really having trouble with that letting go part. I didn't, this was back before van dwelling was a thing and before it was ever a hashtag. This was a long time ago now. And I remember making a comment in an online forum about, I'm scared. I'm not sure this is going to work for me. And the guy who was the host of the forum, he was so kind about it, but he basically said, you've got all of the downsides of living in a van and none of the freedom because you haven't let go. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, mainly because I knew he was right. I still owned too much to be fully free. And I was really holding on because, I still was holding out the dream that I could eventually become a professional artist again, because leaving my husband in my first marriage, because all of my art studios and all of my art equipment was still in the house and I worked from home. So leaving my first husband meant leaving my profession as an artist, a professional artist. So I was still at that point hoping that I could eventually get back to that. Now, I don't have that dream anymore. That one has flown the coop, but that's fine. I've got so many other dreams, it's not even funny. But myself wanting to hold on to things that could be a part of my future as an artist. And that was causing me a problem. It was making it so that I wasn't experiencing the freedom of van dwelling. But I had all the burdens, carrying my jump box into work and charging it so that I would have a little bit of power overnight and that kind of thing. I mean, I had the inconveniences of van dwelling without the freedom of it. And, I wasn't traveling. I was going to work at my normal, set of 20 part-time jobs. I had a whole series of part-time jobs. But then fast forward a number of years, and Xavier and I went tiny. We bought a small house, 125 square feet. We moved in, and we didn't have a mortgage any longer. We bought it straight up with cash. It was very inexpensive as houses go. And I think for the first few months, we didn't feel a lot different. We were still very kind of taking a breather because life had been so crazy hectic. Selling the restaurant, selling off a bunch of stuff, moving things around, trying to find studio space, trying to find space for him to work, had been absolutely exhausting. And it took us a couple of months, I remember, to even kind of unwind into the experience, really. And literally, for a while there, my kitchen was so small that I really felt like we couldn't cook at home because the kitchen was too small. I mean, that was my mindset at the beginning. And it took me a while because, we owned this 3,000 square foot restaurant. I was used to having all the equipment and a guy who did the dishes, So for a while there, we would go out to eat. And we went to the less expensive places, and I started to get sick again, because, fast food places are putting stuff in the food that should not be there. And so we were having health issues as a result of eating that kind of food. And then we made the switch to eating at better places where they were actually serving better quality food. But then one of the reasons why those restaurants are so much fun to go to is because they are loading things with butter and with all the wonderful things that make it taste so good that you would never do at home. You would never put a whole stick of butter in, as you're cooking something. But restaurants do that all the time because that's how it's wonderful. So eating at better quality restaurants had a different effect on the body, and that wasn't good either. So finally it was time for us to figure out how to cook and really eat at home. And that was a paradigm shift, but we did it. And once we figured that out and once we got the hang of that, living tiny became really liberating. And I look back at it as the tiny house didn't change my life. The simplicity required to live well in the tiny house, that absolutely changed my life. We gave up the vacuum cleaner in favor of a beautiful broom. I hate the vacuum cleaner. We gave up the dishwasher and the food processor and the whole 9 yards. Gave up all of that stuff for the ability to make a meal with a good knife on a cutting board and a Dutch oven. Simple as can possibly be, but you can do so much with a good knife on a cutting board. Sure, you need some skills, but that's what the internet is for. There's some fantastic knife skills videos on YouTube. And so literally there's not much that a food processor can do that I can't do with a good knife. And so it became this process for me of taking a look at different aspects of my life and saying, can I simplify this? And the answer was always, of course, there's all this needless complexity. Why is that? And so instead of buying cleaners, I would clean with like baking soda and vinegar and a Thieves household cleaner. And so I had these 3 products that cleaned everything instead of having a under cabinet full of cleaning supplies. I mean, simplified like crazy. Instead of having 20 shoes, I had 3 pairs that I wore all the time. And instead of having 5 coats to choose from or something insane, literally I wore the same coat, These days I have a capsule wardrobe and I have 3 coats, all of which are very comfortable this winter and gave me the luxurious feeling that I could choose a coat. Because a capsule wardrobe for winter or spring is 1 coat, 1 blazer, 1 sweater, 2 bottoms, 3 shirts, and that's 9 items. Tried to hold up the right number of fingers. That's 9 items, and then you have this wild card thing. Okay, so that forms a capsule wardrobe pod. And if you do a pod in a neutral, and you do another pod like that in a color, and you do another pod like that in a color, and then you use all of that stuff to mix and match, you've got about 30 items in your wardrobe. And you have the ability, given that collection of clothes, to dress in a way that is put together and looks fantastic without having a huge closet to make that possible. You have to be intentional about how you shop, and you have to take the time to put it all together, which is actually a fraction of the time you would think it would take. I mean, my first capsule wardrobe took me days to put together because it was such a mindset shift. And now, I can literally sit down with thread up and fill my basket and create a capsule wardrobe completely online. And, that doesn't make any sense. That you don't have to do that. But start with what you have. Don't ever start with with a place to shop. But I did it as a way of showing an example. I went to thread up and put together a capsule wardrobe. It didn't take long at all. And it was a really great combination of clothing. And so what I need to do is offer a consulting service where I'll put together your capsule wardrobe. I think it's so much fun. It is absolutely so much fun. But now I teach other people how to do that. That's part of my class that I call Practically Tiny, and that's currently available on my website. So, this didn't intend to become an ad, but what I have found as I have taken the time to look at various aspects of my life and my habits is that there have been ways I can simplify everything. And as I was intentional about doing that, it made it possible for me to clear out stuff that I don't need. And that's the part that's really liberating. I still have too much stuff, and I'm still working at this process. I am very much in process. I am not an arrived kind of soul at all. I don't ever want to present myself that way. But I am very much in the process of continuing to simplify and minimize and just clear the clutter, because I know it's freeing. I know it's liberating. And Bob was right all those years ago when I was talking about van life and I was having trouble letting go of the stuff. And he was saying you've got the inconvenient parts of van dwelling and none of the perks of the freedom because I hadn't let go of the stuff. And so as I'm talking to you, I'm actually challenging myself to a new level of simplicity. And as we have a little bit more time at home than we have for a while, here's a really great opportunity to just clean out a sock drawer, clean out the underwear drawer, find a drawer that seems to collect all the weird miscellaneous stuff and clean it out. And it's also, I think, really helpful to use a little downtime like this to talk about life purpose and things that we really want to have as a part of our future. If tiny living is something that you want to have as part of your future, that's great. How will you set up your life to reach that goal? Right now when there's so much financial insecurity, one of the best things that we can do is cut our lives in half. Cut our lives, maybe even cut our lives down to a quarter. If you own stuff, that means you have to have a big house. That means you are locked into that big house payment. And that can get painful in a hurry. Many of us live on that gerbils wheel of go to work, get the paycheck, and meet the needs. And we are locked into that circle by the needs that we have, by our perception of what we need, which is all mindset. It is absolutely all mindset. Do you know that the need for toilet paper is mindset? You know that the people around the world use cloth and wash it and reuse it over and over again and don't even need toilet paper? You know that there's other people that use leaves and there's 1,000 different choices. We don't actually have to cut down the forest to create paper to use as toilet paper. But it's all right here. It's all mindset stuff. It's absolutely about what we are used to having. Therefore, we think it's a need. And what we feel like we deserve. And deserving is such an interesting idea because it leads us to look at something in the store and say, ooh, I deserve this, don't you think? And it becomes about personal worth over everything else. And the interesting thing is it keeps us locked into a cycle of debt and insecurity that we wouldn't have if we looked at the item and said, do I deserve this? Who cares? Do I need it? And then that becomes a question of it. Does it fit my purpose? Does it serve my purpose? Does it help me get to the place I need to be? And if the answer is no, then don't buy it. It's a completely different mindset. But we're so stuck in the sense of what I need that I think we keep ourselves from the liberation that we could experience because we're so committed into what I need. Literally, when you listen to people talk about going tiny, we literally talk about the must-have list. And it will be things like a dishwasher and, and all these things that we don't need, but we put them on the must-have list because we feel like we deserve it, which will lead us into an uncomfortable place down the road. Or, we have these kind of screwy notions of need and that kind of thing. And I think this movement began in a place of simplicity. It began in a place of, I can make my life beautiful and simple, and I can have at my fingertips what I need, what I really need. And every item can be useful and beautiful or I don't own it. And the spaces were very small at the beginning. Now they have, just like American cars, they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And they get more complex, there's more systems, there's more gadgets, there's more, all the stuff. And even to the point of some of the aspects that aren't that healthy, like, well, maybe we just better not go there. Because I'm about to the end of my time, and I don't want to blow it all on talking about toxins in the home. Because that is a real pet peeve of mine. That we are poisoning ourselves. I said I wasn't going to go there. This is sometimes hard not to go there. So today, what I know that I didn't know when I lived in the big house on the golf course is that simplicity is not about organization. It's not about neatness. Simplicity is about freedom. It's about not owning something I don't need. And I got a long way to go on that front. That is a goal I continue to work towards. And yes, I've got some materials out there to help people to embrace simplicity themselves. And I've got classes, I've got my book, Kitchen Simplicity, all of that. That's fantastic. But that doesn't change the fact that I am on this journey and that I continue to want to live simply. One of the things that surprised me about going tiny was that we lived tiny for a while, and I had decided I'm the queen of having a project going in the house. I mean, you're watching me right now. I've got a wall of yarn behind me, and I love weaving. I've got a project on the loom right now. And I love these projects, these artsy things, because they are so much a part of me. But there wasn't space in my tiny house to make a quilt. There wasn't space for, there wasn't space to paint. I mean, literally, if I spread all the stuff out on the table to paint, somebody would come home and say, lunch? And that would be that. And that's fine. There just wasn't the space. And I felt very uncomfortable about that for a while. I fought it for a while. But then there came a time when I realized that home could just be home for me. I didn't have to be busy every moment to prove my worth. I come from a Mennonite community, a Mennonite subculture, which is all about, and one of the characteristics of that community tends to be an extreme work ethic. We are people who work hard and work all the hours, and that's fine if that's what you want. But I think there was something I didn't realize was happening, was that I was working all the time instead of relaxing. There was no home space, which was there wasn't a space in the day which was just be. And so in tiny house living, I gained that period of time in the morning when we sat at the table and shared a loaf of fresh bread or a pastry from this wonderful little Spanish bakery that's about 45 minutes from here. We would go and buy enough for a week and a half or 2 weeks and stick some of it in the freezer, and we would have these wonderful pastries. We would have tea in the china cup with the saucer and the silver spoon. I mean, we had these moments, these morning routines that were luxurious. They were tiny, but they were luxurious. And we would sit and talk and enjoy the view. I mean, a number of places where we parked, we had these amazing views. And it was a moment where home really became something very special. At the end of the day, there were times when we would watch TV, and that's fine. And there were also times when we would turn off the TV, light a candle, play a game of cards, and put on some really good music. And I still remember those times with such fondness. And we haven't done that for a while, and we need to. But I remember those times with such fondness because home wasn't about a project at that point. Home was about connection. And that was amazing. And we needed a building for our business, so we purchased the building I'm standing in right now. It's a little house, a little 2-bedroom house, and we used the living room for a piano workshop, and Xavier restored a piano. And we ended up kind of moving into this space. Once the piano was finished, we made a living room out of the living room, a number of things like that. But I remember feeling like I was missing something. I had this space suddenly, but it didn't feel the same. And so I literally got the table from our tiny house, and it's a two-top from the restaurant. I think it must be about 24 inches by maybe 30. It's a very small table. But the fact that we could sit at that table and be close and enjoy a cup of tea, even the teacup with a saucer, with a silver spoon if we wanted to, and we could come back together into that intimacy that we had grown accustomed to in the tiny house. And that made this house feel much more like home again. And yeah, I literally painted the walls dark colors to make them feel cozier because I missed the tiny house. So isn't it funny that after all this time of wanting my big dream house, that living tiny changed that for me, and I'm in a 660 square foot house, 2/3 of which is business. No, it's about half. I don't know, it may be more. I don't know. I've kind of lost track. But anyway, and the dream for me has become a tiny house where I can go away to go home. And so that I can return to that place where home is just a haven. Home is not a place where I do projects. It's not a place where I work from. Yes, this is convenient. But it is really something to have a space where you are away from work. And we needed that in the period where we were living tiny, and we need it again. And I think a lot of us need that kind of thing these days. If I can make a recommendation to somebody who doesn't live tiny, and I say this with a full understanding of what I'm saying. Moving is a hassle. Selling property is a pain. But if I could offer advice, especially if you're a renter, my advice would be cut it all in half. Cut it in half, or maybe go down to a quarter if you're really brave. Start with cut it all in half. Put the house on the market, move into one that is half the size. If you already live in a small apartment, maybe your half is moving into a bus or moving into a van. The key, I think, for me is that if you can go from having a mortgage to not having a mortgage, the level of freedom that you will experience in your life is absolutely amazing. Now, let me be clear. Going from a $500,000 mortgage over 30 years to a $100,000 mortgage over 15 years is still a dramatic improvement. So I'm not going to say all debt is wrong, because I don't believe that. Having a lot less and having a much lower payment, and even having a smaller payment that's not 30 years, it's 15, that is improvement too, because what happens is it gives us space in our lives to come home and to be with a little less fear, because it's crazy out there right now. And fear literally lowers our frequency. It has a physical and spiritual result in the body. And the longer we live in that place, the more we will experience health concerns that are completely unrelated to the thing we're all scared of catching. So I think it's really important now more than ever to alleviate some of the housing concerns that we may have and to be proactive about that. I really looked at the restaurant. I'm going to be really honest with you. I looked at the health of our restaurant. I looked at my own physical health, and I looked at what it would take to make that business viable for 20 years. I knew I didn't have 20 years of restaurant ownership in my body. I knew that just wasn't going to work. And so I made the decision to go out of business, to sell the business before the business could take me out. I made a proactive decision because it would have taken out my health or would have taken us out financially. And so it was a proactive choice that we made, that today I'm going to make a big sacrifice. I'm not going to be a restaurant owner anymore, in order that I can have a better life tomorrow or down the road, months or maybe years from now. So if I can give you anything today, it's the ability to look very cold-heartedly at your life and make some proactive decisions today that are going to take some work to carry out, but are also going to set you free. And I don't want you to be afraid of letting go of something, because what you stand to gain, I don't want you to have the difficult parts, the difficult aspects of living tiny without the freedom. And that only happens if you hang on to too much stuff. What I want you to have is the freedom, no matter whether or not you live in a tiny house on wheels, or if you live in an RV or a boat or a van or a bus or a small apartment, or like that little house across the street, a very small house on foundation. That house is valued at $60,000. I saw it on the GIS. And it's this little house on a foundation in a neighborhood here in town. And you can't buy much of a tiny house for that, a tiny house on wheels. So we need to recalibrate about what's cool and about what's really practical and useful. In some cases, maybe going to a smaller house on a foundation makes more sense than buying the expensive tiny house and trying to find a place to park it. So we need to recalibrate some of our expectations and talk very seriously about what is need and what is want. Because when it really comes down to it, we can live like a monk or a nun and have the clothes that we're wearing and the clothes that are in the laundry. That would take care of what we literally need in terms of clothing. I know, shocking, right? We could live in a dormitory and each person have a room. That would take care of our need for shelter. Now, do we want to live that way? Not necessarily. So we can really take a cold, hard, practical look at our needs and how to meet them in creative ways. And we can leave this "I deserve" phrase out of the mix, because none of this is about what you're worth as a person. None of this is about your value as a human. You know, I would wear Prada if, I don't know, I don't even know what Prada looks like. I would wear really expensive brands if I dressed my worth. But I don't want to pay for that price. I don't want to pay for, I don't want it on my credit card. I don't want a credit card. You know, I don't want any of that. And I have value aside from whose name I'm wearing. I have value in my name alone. I have value in being made in the image of God. And so I don't have to put on an expensive brand name to be somebody. If I'm not somebody without that item of clothing, then buying that piece of clothing will not help me become somebody. You know, if I'm not somebody without driving a Mercedes, then driving a Mercedes is not going to help me. I love my Mercedes, but it doesn't make me somebody that I'm not, you know? And besides, it's the 1984 version. It's a kind of rare old bird. I love that car. But anyway, I'm completely off the track. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Today has been a little bit of a ramble through what it means to live simply and to really take a cold, hard look at what we need and what we don't need. We can choose different markers, so to speak. We can compare ourselves to the Joneses or the Kardashians or the this and that's, you know, whoever, or we can compare ourselves to monks and nuns and really get a very different perspective on our lives. It does matter who you compare yourself to, and comparing yourself to other people is genuinely not helpful, because it can feed into that sense that we are not worthy. And so I just hate the idea that marketing in this country has been so successful at telling us that we don't have worth unless we buy a thing. And we need to be revolutionary about that and just turn it off and say, no, I am not receiving that message. I'm not buying that item. And I do not support people. I do not support corporations and companies that use shame and fear in their marketing. No, thank you. Not working. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.
You can follow me on Instagram at Carmen Rose Shank. You can subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Please do. And you can download us on iTunes. Theme music is composed by William Kirkpatrick. Lyrics by Louisa Stead. Arranged and performed by classical guitarist Jonathan Crispin. Show notes available at carmenshank.com.
bye.